Okay, so the second video of the day for me today, and I wanted to take this chance to discuss a little more something that cropped up in the first video, and to set it maybe in a little bit more context, because I don't think I gave it enough context. I just gave it short shrift really without explaining my thoughts on it, and I wanted to do a little bit more of that now, maybe to preempt some responses rather than in lieu of some responses that I've already got, because it's always best to get it out in advance if you've more to say, I think. In fact, the first video of the day, which was on the Serena Williams thing, somewhat face-palmingly, was intended for this channel, and I'd even put the little intro on, and then I uploaded it to the wrong channel. I thought it was doing pretty well, actually, for this channel, and then I realised what I'd done. What I wanted to talk about was the whole Serena Williams thing in relation to race, racism, ethnicity, caricaturing, and I suppose ethnic characteristics, because this is what this all boils down to, and the claim that the cartoon was racist, and not racist in relation to the Japanese competitor who was misportrayed, but that's a legitimate point. She was portrayed as a blonde white woman, seemingly quite bizarrely, as if I think the cartoonist hadn't really thought that bit through. He just wanted another tennis player there, I think. But that's a pretty legitimate claim, I think. Separate these things into two things, I think. One of the complaints was that this whole angry black woman trope, which I kind of dismiss out of hand, because I think there's really, how do you portray, she was portrayed as having a kind of tantrum, and in this tantrum position, and apparently that has been used by racists in the past to portray black women or black people having tantrums. But that's kind of how you display somebody having a tantrum. The only other way I can think of displaying, as I said in the comment, displaying her really was her anger, which is usually portrayed in this kind of comedic sense with the smoke coming out of the nostrils, which is always associated then, or steam coming out of the nostrils with bulls. But of course the whole business of bulls, black bulls, and the hyper-masculinity of bulls, and the idea that black women are portrayed as particularly masculine. These are all racist stereotypes again. So I challenge somebody in the comments, what cartoon would you have come up with that would have managed to get the ideas across? It almost seems like the problem is with this is that when it comes to portraying things, we only have a certain number of things to go for, a certain number of obvious things to go for, which people will understand, certain types of imagery, and a racist will use those types of imagery the same as anybody else will. So the fact that it's tainted with that, I think if we say, well, if a racist used that imagery without giving it some deeper thought, is what I mean, then that's a well we can never go to on those grounds. It almost becomes impossible, because what is the racist going to go to a lot of time? They're going to go to the things which make the most sense. So it doesn't really leave you with anything left, does it? But I was more interested in the physical characteristics aspect, because it is a complex thing, and it wasn't quite as cut and dried as I maybe made it out, which is sort of as if you can just portray whatever you want and you don't have to give any thought to it. Because there was also the claims with regard to Serena Williams that it was sort of her physical characteristics, a physiology that was portrayed in a stereotypical way, and that's racist, because again, people in the past have portrayed it in that stereotypical way. And of course those links exist, and you can understand how that functions, and of course it can function in lots of different ways, that the portrayal of the caricature of, I suppose you could say, racial characteristics, but really we're talking about ethnic characteristics, and that can impact upon people, both races in terms of the kind of racial categories as we understand them, whatever you think about them, in terms of ethnicity and ethnic characteristics, and also in terms of nationality, that those kind of portrayals can exist. And the question is, when is it okay and when isn't it? And it's quite a complicated thing, of course, and you can, I think for each characteristic you'd have to sort of look at how it functions. I mean, the classic one is the Jewish bloke there with the hook nose and his money grubbing, hands wringing together and counting money and all that lot. And I think it's important to sort of think, what those things in those highly racist, objectionable cartoons, what those things represented, and the association with money and the wringing of hands and all these kinds of things. Clearly, they are explicitly related to the negativity of the image, whereas the over the top caricatured hook nose, as far as I understand it, isn't. There's not saying this is a negative. Be negative about groups about Jews because they've got a hook nose. That is effectively an indicator. That is so that we know that the person that's being portrayed is a Jewish person. There isn't some implication that having that kind of a nose is a negative characteristic, whereas those other characteristics are part of the negative associations that were made with Jews. So I think with any group you could associate those different things, and groups negativity can reflect upon groups for different reasons. Quite ironically, because you can have the activities of racists, for example, portraying other groups in a negative sense, and that can impact upon how those caricatured portrayals pervade and carry on into the future. But like I say, ironically as well, you could have a group like the National Socialist Party, the Nazis, and the way that they portrayed the Aryan ideal, I would say you could look at that as well as adding a negative aspect to anybody who is caricatured in a sort of idealistic Aryan way. And so where do we go from this, and where is it okay and where isn't it okay? And I think, for me, because what we're talking about here is portraying individuals, the tricky ground, I think, is when you get somebody like Serena Williams, because it's just the unfortunate thing about somebody like Serena Williams is she happens to actually embody in her physiology many of those characteristics that are traditionally tied into the stereotype of the, I suppose, the West African black woman is really what we're talking about. It's not all black women, because in East Africa and some ethnic groups within Africa, people look quite different from that. But those things that are tied in to those stereotypes, the big build, the big ass, flat, wider nose, large lips, and of course the afro hair, she ties into she's ticking all those boxes there. For me, part of the issue then, and why I didn't have a problem with this, is that, for example, one of the things that was called out about that was her build. She had this masculine build with the big frame and the big bum, but with a big bum as well. But the problem is that is actually her build, and I think it's taking it stage too far to say, effectively, you cannot caricature a person if their characteristics are the same as the characteristics of the stereotype of their ethnic group, if you see what I mean. Had it instead been of Serena Williams been her sister Venus Williams, who has a very, very different build to Serena, much more taller, much more slender, her limbs are more slender, her shoulders are narrower, hips are narrower, she's just a very, very different build. Had the caricature artist portrayed her in the same way as he portrayed Serena, that would have rung an alarm bell for me, because then clearly Venus Williams doesn't look like that. When you caricature somebody, what you do is you exaggerate the features that they have. It's maybe unfortunate that with Serena Williams, if you exaggerate her features, then you're exaggerating the same features that have been associated with black women generally. But Serena Williams is not quite the same. So if you gave her those traditional stereotypical features, then where are you getting them from? You're not getting them from Venus Williams, so effectively you're not representing her as an individual, which is what a caricature of an individual should be. So I'd be a little bit more concerned. I'd be a lot more concerned about that. But I just think it's very, very easy to jump to conclusions. With regard to Serena Williams, and just along these lines, not so much of caricaturing, but in terms of stereotypes and negative stereotypes. I had a discussion, not a particularly pleasant discussion because we don't get on particularly well, but with a black female YouTuber who's familiar with Foxy Jezebel, a couple of years or so ago where she was bemoaning the fact that Serena Williams was being portrayed as manly and masculine, and she was saying the reason for this is because she's a black woman and it ties in to these racist, stereotypical ideas, generalizations about black women. And I just didn't see how she could make that case. If Serena Williams wasn't of that build, and let's be honest, I mean, she's a fabulous athlete, she's a fabulous tennis player, probably the greatest women's tennis player there's ever been, but she does have that kind of a build. She has a very, very impressive, big, athletic physique with wide shoulders, muscly arms, muscly legs. She's just a big woman, right? Big, powerful woman. That is what she is. And it seemed a real leap there. Effectively what she was saying, Serena Williams is being portrayed in this way. This has traditionally been a racist portrayal, ergo that is why she's being portrayed that way. And as I said to Foxy Jezebel, I said, if you went back into the 1980s, more racist times than today, I would say, in the UK, we were very fortunate in having two elite female javelin throwers in the UK, one of whom was black. And what could be a more fertile ground, let's be honest, if you want sort of easy racist a ground than a black female javelin thrower. But of those two javelin throwers, one of them throughout her career was plagued by comments about her manliness. Right. And I'm not saying that that's okay, because it's just personally nasty thing to do. I think there's no need for it, right? You might think it, but why say it? But one of them was portrayed for it, and it wasn't in that way, and it wasn't the black woman. The black woman was Tessa Sanderson, and the other woman was Fatima Whitbread. Fatima Whitbread was plagued with insults and jibes about how manly she was, and she wasn't the black one of the two. Now, had Tessa Sanderson had Fatima Whitbread's physique, Fatima Whitbread's sort of manly-looking face, I suppose, and her voice, Tessa Sanderson would have been the one getting those manly components, and then there would have been a Foxy Jezebel saying, she's only getting those comments because she's a black woman. So I think we can kind of leap to those things, and there might be times when we do leap to it, because if you see a black woman getting those comments, and clearly that doesn't apply, then I think that's a fair thing to leap to. But if you have somebody who does fill those things, then I think it's a bit of a fucking stretch to say why that's happening. And so that was the kind of way that I viewed that cartoon, which was, I could see that there were sort of stereotypical, physical, caricatured aspects to Serena Williams that would go along, they're along the same lines as these traditional portrayals that had been used by people who were racists. But that's really it's just an unfortunate truth that sort of Serena Williams' physiology fits in with that. So even if we were all entirely naive of anything that had ever happened, and none of that had happened in the past, you'd still, because it's a caricature, you exaggerate whatever it is. If you caricature me, my forehead is going to be as big as half the fucking planet, right? You're going to go, because that's what a caricature is. And so you're going to make her big and fucking powerful with a big butt and big frizzy hair, because that's what she is. I mean, there was somebody who even complained in one of the things that the skirt she had on, she had this kind of tutu skirt on, that it was all too similar to the kind of grass skirts that African women wear traditionally. I mean, what a fucking reach that was. Earlier on in the tournament, or was it the tournament beforehand, Serena Williams had made this big thing about wearing this fucking tutu skirt, and it was all over the news, and she made a big thing about it, and that's what she was portrayed in. So that was, again, it was leaping to this conclusion. I do think, the reason I wanted to make this video is just to clear up that I do think that there are circumstances where portrayals can just be lazy, and you can be portraying someone as having certain characteristics when they don't actually have them, but it's just characteristics that you associate with their race, or with an more reasonably, in fact, with an ethnic group, because different ethnic groups do have different physical characteristics. Some are taller, some are shorter, some are wider, some are thinner, some have different facial characteristics, eye colour, hair types, etc. We all know that's not controversial. And then it is lazy. When that is what you're doing, then that is lazy, and that is getting into the racist territory, I think. But I really don't think it's a real problem we're getting to if effectively we're saying, well, you can stereotype Venus Williams. That's absolutely fine because she doesn't look like this certain type, but a sister you can't caricature. Sorry, you can caricature Venus Williams, but you can't caricature Serena Williams because it would be dicey the things you would have to do to caricature Serena Williams. So that's kind of how I felt about it. Interested to know what anybody thinks. Sorry if this explanation has gone on a little bit long, but I just wanted to sort of lay out a little bit more how I felt about it. Okay, thanks for listening.